When I was in the first year of high school, I used to love going fishing. I was really into mountain stream fishing. I would always try to catch iwana. It's a kind of rockfish out here in Japan. It's a type of fish that is very sensitive. If it gets the slightest indication that there are humans around, it will dart off. It meant that fishing for this rockfish must be strictly a solo venture. If I saw another angler nearby, I would always find another body of water to fish in. I was serious about my hobby. The fishing spots I used were about 20 minutes off the normal footpath in the woods. Well, more like the mountainous woods. So after school on the day before I intended to fish, I would always head up there. I would wrap thread around trees, over bushes, across boulders, any place where anyone could gain entrance to these streams. I would do this to know where the quiet fishing spots were. The thread was incredibly thin and barely visible, and it would always break on impact. I was certain that no one would get hurt. So the next day, I rode my bike into the woods. I went around checking all the thread that I had set up, and I smiled when I found an area which didn't have a break in the thread. I knew that no one would be fishing down there. So I broke the thread myself and squeezed and ducked my way through all the forest obstacles and headed down to the stream. I started fishing almost immediately. There was a problem though. I could hear voices upstream. Someone was making a hell of a noise up there. Seemed weird because of the effort I had to go to get down here. We were deep in the forest, the trees were thicker, and there were boulders everywhere. It didn't seem like a place that people would come to play. And the thread wasn't broken either. They must have been crazy to be playing out here. They were getting to me. I really wanted peace and quiet to catch this goddamn rockfish. They were ruining it. At points, it sounded like their laughter and screams were all around me. After a while, it sounded like their voices were headed further away, and I thought I might still get a chance to do some fishing. I wanted to get on with it. The sun was beginning to set. Just as soon as I resumed, a bunch of dead leaves started flowing downstream, enough to literally cover the whole surface of the water, rendering fishing impossible. What are you doing, you idiots? I thought. I was really angry. They scared away any fish that might have come back. I felt for certain that these people were messing with me and laughing at me. I couldn't see them though. I suspected that it would be a bunch of guys, so I held off shouting what I was thinking. Who knows how many of them could be out here? It's never a good idea to tick off a bunch of unseen people in the woods, right? But to satisfy my own curiosity and find out what these people looked like and what the hell they were doing, I decided to creep up the river towards where I heard all that noise. At points, it sounded like my friends from school, and I couldn't believe that they would be out here doing this to me. Well, maybe as a prank, I suppose, but it didn't seem right. I can't be sure, but I thought I heard my name at one point too. I climbed up the very narrow rocky path littered with trees and bushes alongside the stream. The trees totally surrounded me on either side. I felt like I was on a jungle expedition, like in the movies or something. As I grew closer, amidst the sounds of voices, which still sounded like my friends, was a lone, strong female voice. Then the male voices faded away, like they weren't even there in the first place, like it had changed. It was strange to think of a woman now alone here. To get wherever she was, you would have to walk in the river at points. I could do this easily as I was wearing my fishing gear. Stranger still, why did she come all the way out here into the woods just to act so creepily? When I thought about that, all the noises suddenly stopped. To be suddenly plunged into silence after all that was very jolting. I was getting scared now. I said to myself, enough, let's get out of here. I turned around and started moving as quickly and as quietly as I could back the way I came. I started to hear something splashing behind me. I realized quickly that it was heading right towards me. I was now terrified. I broke into a full-on sprint. Weaving in and out of the trees and the boulders, I got back to my fishing gear and ran straight past it, almost tripping over my tackle box. I ran back to the main path where I'd set up the thread. As soon as I had the path out of there, I looked back despite my fear. I wanted to see what had been chasing me. I saw a horrible dark shadow between the trees, hunched and facing my direction. I swear, it was looking at me, but I couldn't make out where its eyes were. I froze in my tracks. I was so frightened I just couldn't move. Then it moved its elongated body back down towards the stream. I never set foot in those woods again. I didn't even go back for my fishing equipment. It was a real shame to lose it all, especially since I was young, but I just couldn't face going back there. I literally have no clue what that thing was. I'm all ears to any suggestions. Was it a ghost? Maybe some kind of cryptid? How did it mimic all those voices? I think about it all the time. It's the scariest thing that's ever happened to me.
Now to start this off, I'm a 29-year-old man, and 3 times a year I head up to Georgia in the mountains to camp, fish, and have a great time. But after this last trip, I doubt I will ever go again. I had been super excited the week before I was to head up to Georgia, and when the day finally came, I could have died with happiness. I loaded up my dog Buddy and all my gear and started the trip. About a half hour into my trip, I saw a road that I've never been on before. I decided I would take an hour to look around and go back to the main road. I lost track of time, and before I knew it, the sun was setting. I grabbed my gear and Buddy and we hiked about 10 minutes before finding a nice clearing in the forest. I set up camp and looked around my camp. I saw small, man-made trails leading into the dark trees and decided that me and Buddy should take a walk. I grabbed my walking stick, Buddy's leash, and a headlamp, and we headed onto the trail. I knew something was wrong when I could not hear a single insect or animal. Me and Buddy stopped at a little creek when I saw something terrifying. 2 eyes reflecting from my headlamp. The thing was really tall, 6 or 7 feet tall, and the eyes were too big to be a human. My dog is usually very protective of me, but instead of barking or doing something, he whimpered and peed on my leg. I've never seen him act like this before. He's seen bears before and has scared off mountain lions, but he never peed like this. As Buddy kept whimpering, I felt terrible, like this thing hated me and it could rip me to shreds if it wanted to. Then it made the scariest noise I have ever heard. It sounded like a maniac screaming. Me and my dog bolted to our camp. In our camp, I could still hear the thing. Needless to say, we were not staying here. I packed up the camp as Buddy stood watch. We ran back to my truck and got out of there. I went straight home and did not sleep. Later on, I looked on the internet what could have made that noise, and nothing I could find came close to it. I really don't know what's wrong, but there's something weird in the woods of Georgia.
This happened the other day, when I was out with some friends. We had spoken about taking a trip to an outlet mall in the next city over. It would be me, my girlfriend, and my friend and his girlfriend. We had been friends since junior high school, so it was a nice trip back down memory lane to all hang out together. I have had a driver's license since I graduated from high school, and I was going to drive. I don't have a car myself since it's more economical to use the train to commute to work. I decided to rent a car since I'm not exactly rich. I went for a cheap one. It was just an old family car which had thousands of miles on the clock. It would do, I thought. I got in the car straight away, and as soon as I did, I found it cold in there. I guessed that the guy who had brought it round must have been blasting the AC. Since I would have 3 other people in this rental car shortly, and it was the height of summer, I didn't care that it was a little cold. So we set off that day. It took about 2 hours to get there using the expressway. On the way we were chatting about old times. It was really fun. We pulled into a rest area about halfway on the trip, and when we were about to get back on the road again, something strange happened. My friend, the other guy, was sitting in the front seat on the drive up, and now he wanted to go in the back. This didn't seem like him at all. "I prefer sitting back here, someone else can ride in the front," he said. The girls looked at one another, and neither of them seemed to want to ride in the front either. Things got weirder when a full-blown argument broke out about who had to ride in the front. The atmosphere really changed. It was so weird. I couldn't understand what the big deal was, but none of them were backing down. It was like being at school again. I just told them that they could all ride in the back. We took off and I tried to lighten the mood, but it was tough. We arrived at the mall and things picked up. We had lunch and we were shopping and we all forgot about it. Before we knew it, it was evening time and the sun was setting. We had decided it was time to be heading back. When we got to the parking lot, they all ran to the back doors of the car. They wanted to ride in the back again. I didn't care at this point, I just wanted to go home. Maybe we were all tired because we were pretty much silent on the drive back. It had been smooth sailing the whole way to the mall, but on the way back, I guess I must have taken a turning I shouldn't have or something because I was now driving down more rural roads, and the number of cars on the streets had decreased. The weird thing was that I had been using the car's satellite navigation system, so I don't know how I ended up down these dark, quiet roads leading to the mountains. I pulled over and checked what was up with the sat-nav. The address of the rental place was in there, but I was really far away from the highway. "What's wrong?" my friend asked from the back seat. "Navigation's all messed up," I replied. I deleted everything and put in the rental place's address again, and then we set off. After about 10 minutes, the navigation asked me to turn left. I did so, and we went down this really thin lane. It literally took us deep into the woods. There were no streetlights, and it was really dark. I was obviously skeptical of this. We didn't have to pass through the woods to get here, why should we have to on the way back? But since I was in a place I hadn't been before, I gave the sat-nav the benefit of the doubt and trusted it. The guys in the back were deathly silent, so at least I didn't have any protests. I headed up a slope. There was nothing but dark, dense forest surrounding us. After a little while, the paved asphalt road beneath us disappeared and we entered grassland. Now I was convinced that the sat-nav was wrong. "Sorry guys, looks like I made a mistake here. I need to make a U-turn." Still they were silent back there. I don't know why, but I didn't take off straight away. I don't know why, but I stopped the car there. And as soon as I did, everyone got out. I still don't know why I parked the car there. It was like I was supposed to. I got out of the car too. "What is this place?" my friend's girlfriend asked. The trees were swaying in the breeze, making a kind of sighing sound. Even though it was just a bit of grassland in the woods, it felt incredibly oppressing to be there. My chest was tightening. Then the 3 of them started marching into the woods. "Hey, what are you doing?" I called out. They didn't reply, and they didn't stop. I really didn't want to lose them in the woods. I ran up to them to try and stop them, but they just wouldn't stop. I didn't know what to do, but for some reason I raced back to the car and honked the horn. Then, as if they had snapped out of some kind of trance, they stopped walking. They came back to the car, got in the back seat, and I did my U-turn, and I got the hell out of there. Something was off about that place. I looked in the rearview mirror only once, but I swear I saw someone stood behind a tree, peering out at us. After we got out of the woods, I managed to get back onto the highway. My friends were silent until this point. They seemed terrified. When we were on the highway, they told me that they had no recollection of getting out of the car and heading into the woods. We managed to get back to the rental place without any other weird goings-on. I was so tired. We were asked to check the car to make sure we hadn't forgotten anything. I looked under the passenger seat and found a ring. It looked like a wedding ring. I asked the girls just in case, but they said it wasn't theirs. Now, this is a little out there, but this is my personal theory of what happened that night. It goes like this. Something happened to the owner of that ring in the woods that the sat-nav led us to. We were probably invited there by the owner of that ring. Now, I don't know if there are any active disappearance cases or any unsolved murders, but something doesn't seem right. We had to give the ring to the rental car place to store it in their lost and found property. When renting a car, you never know what could have happened in it before you get it.
Now to start this off, I'm a 22-year-old man with lots of energy. So much so, I usually take midnight walks around my house to get me ready for bed, and usually I cannot fall asleep before 2 a.m. My parents recently told me they are going on a vacation and needed a house sitter. Being the cheap parents they were, they asked me to watch their cabin in some random forest 30 miles away from the nearest town and 3 miles from the nearest neighbor. Cabin in the middle of nowhere, all alone, with a lakefront view. Who could say no? I told them goodbye and wished them luck on their trip, and I arrived at the cabin the next day. The first day went well because I thought they didn't have cable or service. I was wrong, they apparently did. I finished swimming and ate some good food, but the second day is when the nightmare truly started. The time was about 1:08 in the morning, and I could not sleep at all. I put on my boots and headed out in the cool night air for a little walk. I walked around the house a couple of times and stood by the edge of the thick forest. Just when I was about to head back to bed, I heard footsteps from the trees. Now, I'm used to deer being everywhere around my house, but the footsteps sounded way heavier than a normal deer. Being the curious chap I was, I threw a rock in the thick brush. I wanted to see if it would run off, but instead, I was met with silence. At first. Then I heard something I wish I didn't. Laughing. Giggling almost. Not from a real person or a normal person, but from someone who was truly insane. Then, the same rock I threw was thrown right back at me. I never ran so fast to my truck in all my life. When I turned on my car and the headlights came on, I could see a bald man still laughing where I was just a second ago. I sped off until I reached the end of our long driveway. I then called the sheriff and had to wait for about an hour. When they got there, they thought that I was just joking, but when they checked where I told them to, they found rope, duct tape, a long knife, and a faint, bloody trail leading to another cabin some distance away into the trees. Inside was just a bunch of scribbles like a child does, and a rag covered in blood. The police looked all around and even checked our cabin, but he was never found. The next day, my parents canceled their trip and sold the place in less than 2 weeks. I often chat with my parents and think to myself, wondering whose blood was in that cabin and what would have happened if I didn't find the man in the woods.
This happened when I went camping with a few friends. It got late, and everyone fell asleep. I was the last one awake. I thought I was, anyway. The campfire was still lit. I was yawning and half asleep, in my sleeping bag. I heard the sound of someone stoking the fire, and then I asked, with not much thought, "What are you doing?" I stared in the direction of the stoking sounds and saw someone sat the other side of the fire. I couldn't see them clearly for the fire, but I could see a large, shadowy outline of a person. My field of vision was very hazy. "I'm just watching the fire," a voice replied. For some reason, I wasn't frightened. I should have been asking myself, who the hell was this, and what the hell were they doing at our campsite? We were in the middle of nowhere, deep in the woods, and it must have been about 3 a.m. I don't know if that was down to me being half asleep. I felt like I was in a dreamlike state. You know, that perpetual place between consciousness and sleep. I kept speaking to the owner of that voice without any thought process being initiated in my mind. I thought I was asleep for a while. "If the fire went out, what would you do?" "Don't put the fire out," I replied. "Why? What would happen if the fire went out?" It won't go out. "Out here in the mountains, if this fire went out, you wouldn't be able to see a thing, would you?" "Well, if the fire goes out, I guess we'll just have to deal with whatever happens in the dark." "No one knows what's lurking in the dark, do they?" "The darkness is as frightening as it is deep. We never know what's in the dark. That's why we have to keep the fire burning. We've got to take turns keeping the fire burning, keep watch." I don't know what else to call that thing, but I will call it the Lord of Voices. I don't know why that's even in my head. It kept asking me to extinguish the fire, and it kept telling me that it would be fine. "You're already sleepy. Just put the fire out. You'll sleep so peacefully." "I don't want to do that. I'm fine. Just don't worry." "Shall I put the fire out?" "Don't do that. If you put the fire out, I'll just start the fire again. I don't like the dark." "Once the fire's out, it's already dark. There's no use fighting it. You may as well sleep." "It's okay, I have a lighter. I'll keep the fire burning." "How are you sure it will work? You don't need that, just give it to me. If the fire doesn't go out, what use is the lighter to you? Just throw it away." "It's not mine, you can't do that." This dreamlike state went on for hours in my mind, but in reality perhaps it was just minutes of some fleeting dream. Although deep down, I know it wasn't a dream. I don't know if I can convince you of that, but this was real. Eventually the shadow rose and began to amble away. It swayed as it moved into the darkness. Then I felt as if I was being shaken. It was horrible. And when I opened my eyes, I was eye to eye with one of my friends from the campsite. I was relieved it was him, and not that shadow, the Lord of Voices. "What the hell are you talking about?" he asked. I could only mumble half responses. I was confused myself. I was so confused, but then my thoughts began to make sense. My friends had come out of their tents, and they had heard me muttering alone out there, and they had came to see what the issue was. It was the dead of night and near pitch black, except for the dying embers of the fire. I saw one of my friends was about to extinguish those remaining embers. I flew into an insane panic. I had to be restrained, but there was no way I was going to allow that fire to go out. I screamed at them to never let the fire go out. Then I remembered the Lord of Voices' words with a chill. "No one knows what's lurking in the dark, do they?" I stayed awake all night and watched the fire, shivering in fear of hearing that voice again. But it never came back. I can still hear it in my mind. What was I talking to? Something older than man? I get goosebumps when I think back to that night in the woods.